Hello, my name is Benjamin Hart. I'm an American attorney and the managing director of Integrity Legal here in Bangkok, Thailand. As the title of this video suggests, we're going to discuss the oft talked about in recent days mask mandate here in Bangkok specifically. There are a number of provinces that at a provincial level have imposed this so-called mandate, and I've gotten a number of emails and correspondence from folks that have been asking me, can I do a video on this? I was actually rather hesitant to do this because I don't really like, for my personal opinions, to sort of seep in to some of the analysis of this stuff. I recently made a video about, the discussion of the lockdown and folks talking about, think the Thais need to do more and, this and that and the other thing. I mostly brought that up from a business standpoint because, we've been sitting here for a year dealing with this, and I just felt it was sort of uncalled for to say that there haven't been a number of restrictions placed on folks, when in fact that there have. My hesitance with making this is I have my own, well, we all do. We have our own biases. We have our own opinions. I have my own opinions regarding the notions of these mask mandates. I want to be clear, and nothing in this video is designed to talk about the efficacy of masks, the medical science behind masking, any of that. That is way beyond the bailiwick of myself on any kind of level, frankly, and or this channel in any way. We're talking about legality here. That's stated, in the interest of full disclosure, so that, and again, I view my videos as being out there to try to provide information. I'm primarily looking to inform people because I think a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about certain aspects of the law regarding immigration to the U.S., American law generally, the way American law may interact here in Thailand with Thai law, for example, with Treaty of Amity, for example, and then issues involving a lot of Thai immigration. We discuss Thai immigration pretty frequently on this channel because, again, I think there's a lot of misnomers out there, and it's not really helped by folks that then sort of inject their own opinions into anything. So, again, in the interest of full disclosure, I will sort of provide sort of where my bias is at so the viewer can sort of adjust their own analysis accordingly, on the subsequent information we're going to be imparting in this video. And by the way, buckle up, this is going to be kind of a long one compared to our usual videos because there's a lot to dive into on this particular topic. But again, full disclosure on a personal level, again, I'm not talking about the efficacy of masks. I'm not talking about their medical validity. That's not the purpose. It's not my point. I will say, though, that I have on a personal level, and even the lawyer in me, from a legalistic or from a legal theory framework, me personally, I've got real issues when governments impose or mandate any kind of requirement on people to go about their day-to-day lives. And that's across the board. I would have an issue if the government came down and mandated people wear a certain type of shoes, or that everyone has to carry an umbrella or something. Again, I'm not trying to be funny or snarky in this video or create straw man arguments or something. That's not my purpose. But what I'm saying is it's not the masks per se that bother me on a certain level. Or that might bother me on a certain level, or anything else for that matter. It's the mandate itself. When governments step in and say, hey, you have to do this, again, a lot of red flags in my brain go off. And I, upon further analysis, I may decide, okay, that may be warranted under this given set of circumstances. An example of this is, for example, in the United States, there are certain health and safety requirements associated with things like OSHA, where they say, hey, if you're going to be on a certain premises, you have to wear a hard hat. Well, yeah, my sort of allergic reaction personally might be, well, you can't tell me to wear a hard hat. And then I kind of step back and say, actually, it's a pretty reasonable regulation under the circumstances. Now, one of the reasons I love the law and one of the reasons I love legal analysis is because, a regulation, for example, a hard hat regulation, it's not you have to wear a hard hat everywhere because a piano might fall or a cinder block or something might fall from above at any given time. but you know, you have to wear it under certain circumstances because there is an exigent threat out there. There's a possible problem in a given area. But broad-based requirements out there, I'll be honest, they make me rather uneasy on a personal level. Now, that said, I try not to let that color my own analysis of these things when I'm looking at sort of the legal basis for how something came into effect, etc. For example, there's a million policies in U.S. immigration law or Thai immigration law that I have real issues with, especially as a practical matter, because oftentimes you'll see policy be promulgated and then law and regulation will come out, and it sometimes ends up where the actual practical implications of what they were trying to get, the practical implications of a law or regulation is wildly different than the policy aim they were going for when they promulgated that law or regulation. And again, I see this a lot. So I try to be as dispassionate as possible. I hope folks understand in this video I'm trying to be as dispassionate as possible, but understand my own biases so that you can form your own opinion based on the information we're going to impart herein. Now, a couple of things, again, just to get some stuff out of the way. I'm going to be quoting later on in the video directly from the Communicable Diseases Act of 2015. This comes from, and we'll put a link to this in the description, but this comes from ddc.moph.go.th. This is from the Ministry of Public Health, their website. And this translation, and I'm going to be doing this in English for obvious purposes, the vast majority of our audience wants to discuss this stuff in English. The translation appears to be from the Office of the Council of State, and there is this disclaimer on the translation. Excuse me real quick. Quoting directly, this text has been provided for educational/comprehension purposes and contains no legal authority. The Office of the Council of State shall assume no responsibility for any liabilities arising from the use and/or reference of this text. So understand that's where we're coming from. This whole video is for informational purposes only. It's basically to provide some insight into the legal framework that's being cited for this mask mandate. Again, and let's note, I am a naturalized Thai citizen. I'm an American attorney. I'm educated under a common law system. I have a Juris Doctorate. I am not a Thai attorney, and we have had legal professionals here in our firm have sort of reviewed this, but as they have said, and they have been very clear to me in getting this across in this video and many others, again, sort of broad legal analysis, sort of informational legal analysis is very different than the application of law to facts in an actual adjudication. So you should not be viewing, for example, this video or any video when we're talking about any legal concept as sort of dispositive for a future adjudication. You know, judges have a job. Their job is to interpret the law and to apply it to the facts of a given case. And each case, especially under a civil law system, can be decided in a very different manner depending on, you know, the unique set of facts in that given case and the unique interpretation necessary in that particular case. So understand, this is for informational purposes, educational purposes, and not as some sort of dispositive treatise on the notion of masks in Thailand in general or anything of that nature. It's simply sort of a deep dive, if you will, into the legal authority behind this. Because I've had a lot of people that have contacted us and said, well, where's this coming from? Also, I'm not really pointing any fingers on this, but it's not even, I'm not even really saying the media, but media in general, I have noticed, this is both in America, a lot of the media coverage I've watched regarding certain restrictions, certain actions taken with respect to the response to COVID-19, they tend to sort of speak in broad strokes when I would argue they shouldn't. They should be more specific. And they can kind of also tend to just sort of gloss over things without really taking a measured analytical look at what exactly we're talking about with respect to certain regulations. For example, I've noticed a lot of news outlets have sort of made hay, if you will, of the fact that the Bangkok governor cited the prime minister for apparently not wearing a mask in some sort of proceeding. Well, that's not, and it's sort of almost, to me, when I've been reading this, the implication is, well, clearly it's legitimate because it's being imposed upon the prime minister, I guess. That was kind of an implication I took. Now, again, understand I may have my own biases, and that's just sort of the way I see things. But that was the implication sort of I read into it, which was, oh, well, this is obviously valid if the prime minister has to deal with it. Well, that's not legal analysis. That's just sort of reporting on circumstances. And again, the implication that I got from that was it was sort of an implied, well, this is clearly valid because it applies to everyone. Well, just because a bad law may apply to everyone doesn't necessarily make it valid. Not saying this one is. At the same time, a good law could apply to no one and be valid. So, again, we're looking at this purely from a legalistic standpoint, and we're providing this purely for informational purposes because there's been a lot of, like I said, in the media especially, a lot of just sort of glossing over, the legal authority that this seems to stem from. Now, that's stated after sort of, and I didn't really mean to do that, sort of throwing the media under the bus. I'm going to go ahead and cite the media. And this is from the Phuket News. That's thephuketnews.com. And I do have to say, just sort of hats off, the Phuket News, when they do stories on legal changes in Thailand, immigration changes in Thailand, specific to Phuket generally, they tend to go out of their way to be thorough. And I'm not knocking anybody else. There's a lot of thoroughness in other publications. But I've noticed this. I first noticed this some years ago when we were talking about a decree that came out regarding work permits in Thailand. And I noticed the Phuket News put out an exhaustive piece that really got into the nitty-gritty of the work permit situation. This particular article is titled Phuket 20K Mask Fine Warning Issued as Officials Target, quote, problem foreigners, unquote. And this was published Sunday, the 25th of April, 2021. Again, that's the Phuket News. I'm going to go ahead and quote the relevant section here because, again, this is sort of our jumping off point, if you will, into the underlying legal framework that is being cited as the basis for this quote-unquote mask mandate. Quoting directly, the Phuket Provincial Office will ask for cooperation with people for them to wear masks. And we're quoting, according to the Phuket News, we're quoting Vice Governor Pichit. Quoting further, the Phuket Provincial Office issued Phuket Provincial Order number 62/2021 in January. People must wear masks every time when leaving their accommodations. Violations of the order may be an offense under Section 51 of the Communicable Disease Act, which incurs a fine not exceeding 20,000 baht, he said. Okay, I'm going to go back to Section 51 of the Communicable Disease Act. There's another quote we're going to get to, and then we'll keep moving forward. So, quoting further, and may be punished under Section 18 of the Act, presumably the Communicable Diseases Act, and violators shall be liable to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 2 years or a fine not exceeding 40,000 baht or both. So, first things first, because I've already sort of sussed out how I'm going to lay this out. To get into Section 51, that's a real deep dive, and we're going to get there. But let's start off with this quote, and may be punished under Section 18 of the Act, and violators shall be liable to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 2 years or a fine not exceeding 40,000 baht or both. So Section 18 of the Communicable Diseases Act. So let's go ahead, and I've got that here. So here we are, going to Section 18 of the Communicable Diseases Act. And for those who are sort of aware of Thai legislative history, especially recent Thai legislative history, this act was promulgated in 2015. So if you go back and look, you can get an idea of the circumstances surrounding the promulgation of this act. Well, I shouldn't say the circumstances, the situation at the time of the promulgation of this act. Again, 2015. But that is sort of beyond the scope of this video. So here we go. We're going to Section 18 of the Act. Section 18 states, and I quote, "In performing the duties under this Act, the committee and the technical committee and the subcommittee shall have the power to issue an order in writing to summon any person to come to give statements of fact or express opinions or furnish any necessary information or documents or suggestions in support of consideration." So again, going back to the Phuket News, they're citing a statement made by the vice governor in Phuket. This seems to state, and may be punished under Section 18 of the Act, and violators shall be liable to imprison for a term not exceeding 2 years or a fine not exceeding 40,000 baht. So punished under Section 18 of the Act, Section 18 of the Act, let me just reread this. Again, it's in English, so take it for what it's worth. "In performing the duties under this Act, the committee, the technical committee, and the subcommittee shall have the power to issue an order in writing to summon any person to come to give statements of fact or express opinions or furnish any necessary information or documents or suggestions in support of consideration." And that's it. That's what that section says. So I don't know exactly where the authority for the notion of imprisonment for not exceeding 2 years or a fine not exceeding 40,000 baht comes from within the provisions of that as I'm reading it in English. And I may be missing something, but as I'm reading it in English, I'm not seeing that in there, or at least it's not jumping out at me. Now, that said, again, I may be missing something. I'm always happy to stand corrected. So if there are folks in the comments that have some other commentary on this, I'd be happy to make another video and correct that. But that's the way I read it. There may be a typographical error somewhere in here, but that's the Act, the Communicable Diseases Act of 2015, and that is Section 18. So, setting Section 18 aside, going back in this quote, "Violations of the order may be an offense under Section 51 of the Communicable Diseases Act, which incurs a fine not exceeding 20,000 baht." So let's get into that, and this is going to be a deep dive here. So we're going over to Section 51 of the Act. Quoting directly, "Any person who violates or fails to comply with the order of a communicable disease control officer under Section 34, 1, 2, 5, or 6, Section 39, 1, 2, 3, or 5, Section 40, Subsection 5, or fails to provide convenience to a communicable disease control officer under Section 39, Subsection 4, shall be liable to a fine not exceeding 20,000 baht." Okay, so now we get referred to another section of the Act. Let's go ahead and look at 34 subsection 1 to begin. 34 states, "For the purpose of prevention and control of communicable diseases, when a dangerous communicable disease or an epidemic has occurred or is suspected of having occurred in any area, a communicable disease control officer in such area shall have the power to carry out or issue a written order instructing any person to carry out the following." Here's where we get to subsection 1. "To require persons who are infected or reasonably suspected of being infected with the dangerous communicable disease or epidemic, or who are contacts or carriers, to have a checkup or treatment or medical examination, and for the purpose of safety, such persons may be isolated, quarantined, or controlled for observation at places specified by the communicable disease control officer until such persons have had a checkup and medical examination and it is confirmed that the period of communicability has passed or such suspicion has been dispelled. In the case of an animal, an owner or occupier of the animal shall take the animal to have a checkup or treatment or medical examination." So, again, requiring persons suspected of being infected to have a checkup, medical treatment is basically pretty straightforward there. Okay, so 34 subsection 2. To require persons at risk of being infected with the disease to receive immunization on the date, time, and place as prescribed by the Communicable Disease Control Officer in order to prevent the transmission or the dangerous communicable disease or epidemic. In the case of an animal, an owner or occupier of the animal shall take the animal to receive the protection against the disease. So that appears to be, as it states, immunization. Subsection 5, to require owners, occupiers, or residents in the houses, tenements, places, or conveyances where the dangerous communicable disease or epidemic occurs to prevent the transmission of the disease by eliminating the animals, insects, or immature insects which are a cause of the occurrence of the dangerous communicable disease or epidemic. So owners, occupiers, residents of houses, tenements, or conveyances where this occurs to prevent transmission of the disease by eliminating animals, insects, or immature insects. So again, that kind of seems to pertain to something akin to animals. This one seems to me to be sort of the best candidate for the basis of this overall mandate, subsection 6, to prohibit any person from carrying out or performing any act which may cause unhygienic conditions that may result in the transmission of the dangerous communicable disease or epidemic. So again, that's number 6. And we will come back to that. I'm gonna do some more detailed analysis on that. So that was 34 subsections, 1, 2, 5, or 6. That's what subsection 51 pertains to. Okay? So I'll come back to 6 and we'll do a little deeper dive on the statutory construction there momentarily. But let's move on to 39, subsection 1, 2, 3, or 5. So moving over to section 39. In conducting prevention and control of global communicable diseases, when there are reasonable grounds or there is suspicion that a conveyance comes from any locality or port city outside the kingdom where there is an epidemic, the Communicable Disease Control Officer stationed in an international communicable disease control checkpoint shall have the power and duties as follows. 1, to require the conveyance owner or the conveyance operator to notify a specified arrival date, time, and place of the conveyance at the International Communicable Disease Control Checkpoint to a Communicable Disease Control Officer stationed at the International Communicable Disease Control Checkpoint. So this is kind of like in an international customs type of context. 2, to require the conveyance owner or the conveyance operator whose conveyance has entered the kingdom to submit documents to a Communicable Disease Control Officer stationed at the International Communicable Disease Control Checkpoint. 3, to prohibit any person from entering or leaving the conveyance traveling into the kingdom which has not been inspected by a Communicable Disease Control Officer stationed at the International Communicable Disease Control Checkpoint. And to prohibit any person from bringing any other conveyance up alongside such conveyance unless permission from a Communicable Disease Control Officer stationed at the International Communicable Disease Control Checkpoint has been obtained. Again, kind of like a customs sort of function there. So that was 1, 2, and 3 of that subsection. And now we're moving over to 5. Subsection 5, to prohibit the conveyance owner or conveyance operator from bringing into the kingdom travelers who have not received immunization as prescribed in the notifications by the minister by and with advice of the committee. The notification and the submission of documents by the conveyance owner or conveyance operator under 1 and 2, and the prohibition for the conveyance owner or conveyance operator under 5 shall be in accordance with the criteria, procedures, and conditions prescribed in the ministerial regulations. So that subsection seems to pertain to international travel, and we've discussed that rather at length in other videos. But it doesn't seem to pertain directly to mask mandates directly. And then finally, they also mention section 40, subsection 5. So let's go over to 40, subsection 5. 40 states, when the minister has announced the designation of any locality or port city outside the kingdom as a disease-infected zone under Section 8, a communicable disease control officer stationed at the International Communicable Disease Control Checkpoint shall have the power to carry out or issue a written order instructing the conveyance owner or conveyance operator whose conveyance has entered the kingdom from such locality or port city to carry out the following. And then subsection 5 is specific to the fine: to prohibit any person from taking objects, physical items, or appliances which are or are suspected of being disease-infected material into or out of such conveyance unless permission from a communicable disease control officer stationed at the International Communicable Disease Control Checkpoint has been obtained. So again, this is kind of a customs kind of function associated with quarantine at, for example, a port of some sort. So that brings us to, they say, or fails to provide convenience to a communicable disease control officer under Section 39, subsection 4 shall be liable for the fine. So what's 39, subsection 4 say? Let's backtrack to that real quick. 39, subsection 4 reads as follows: to enter the conveyance and examine travelers, physical items, or animals in the conveyance, and to inspect and control the conveyance owner or conveyance operator, to improve sanitation of the conveyance, to ensure hygienic conditions, as well as to eliminate materials in the conveyance which may be harmful to health. In this regard, the conveyance owner or conveyance operator shall provide convenience to the communicable disease control officer stationed at the International Communicable Disease Control Checkpoint. Again, so this is international context stuff here. This is if you're at an international checkpoint and they can enter a conveyance, or if you fail to allow them to enter the conveyance or provide convenience, if you will, in their duties, you may be fined. So that is pretty much exhaustive of the sections we're dealing with. Now, most of this was pretty self-explanatory. The one to me that sort of stuck out, to read it again: to prohibit any person from carrying out or performing any act which may cause unhygienic conditions that may result in the transmission of the dangerous communicable disease or epidemic. And to me, that looks to me like to be the one subsection on which you can sort of hang your hat the best on these quote-unquote mask mandates. Now, the question arises in my mind. Subsection 6 says to prohibit any person from carrying out or performing any act which may cause unhygienic conditions. To prohibit. The interesting thing to me is it would seem that the requirement of a mask would not be a prohibition, but it would be a compulsion. That's compelling an affirmative act on the part of someone. Again, I'm injecting my own observation, my own insight, if you will, my own opinion into that. But, you know, requiring someone to wear a mask is not a prohibition, it's a requirement, it's a mandate. That said, again, you know, we're reading this from the English. It's not the final say. Again, I've had legal professionals, I've discussed this, Thai legal professionals, we've discussed this. As they've said, you know, there is something to be said for the notion of, you know, a prohibition versus an affirmative requirement of something. But, you know, the nuance of this would be interpreted by a court of law. So you shouldn't really look into this as sort of the dispositive end-all be-all analysis on the overall topic. But it looks like number 6 here is the basis for the fine under Section 51. Again, to prohibit any person from carrying out or performing any act which may cause unhygienic conditions. And perhaps just simply the act of breathing without a mask is considered unhygienic. Is that the analysis? Maybe, you know. Quoting further, that may result in the transmission of the dangerous communicable disease or epidemic. Again, I'm not gonna, you know, sort of go out and state exactly what I think, because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what my opinion on the relevant sections here would be, because an adjudication regarding a possible fine under this act would occur in a court of law in Thailand, and the final decision obviously would have to be made by a judge. So the point of this video was to provide the insight, provide the background, if you will, on the legal framework under which this was promulgated. And, you know, again, Section 51, well, they refer to that, but once you go in and dig into Section 51, there's a whole slew of things behind that they base their fine issuing capacity on under Section 51. Now, my personal opinion is I'm having a hard time seeing exactly where they get the authority to issue such fines based on my basic reading of this act. Now, that said, you know, different people have different opinions, different people have different interpretations. And as I've said, if somebody has anything to say on this, pro, con, whatever, not even pro, con, just weighing in on their opinions on the overall act itself or whatever, I'm always happy to stand corrected. If there's something I've missed here, if there's analysis that maybe I haven't parsed out enough to fully understand, I'm always happy to hear that kind of stuff in the comments below. But folks have asked me pretty much continuously for the past couple of days for some analysis on the underlying legal framework that this mask mandate is based on. We've gone ahead and provided it in this video, and we hope that it has been useful to folks, and it is providing a level of information, and we're hoping that folks got something out of this video.